room. So good morning, afternoon. I don't know what time it is anymore. Um, Thank you all for joining for our fourth webinar for this Common Ground series. This will be the last one for now, but we are hoping to continue doing some webinars in the future. But today we're going to be talking about how you can protect your mental health while in conflict. So this series has really been focused on conflict resolution. So today we're going to talk about mindfulness and stress tolerance, some things that we talked about last webinar if you were here, but in a different context. I was just saying I have so many screens open. I'm hoping that they'll work. Okay, great. So today on our panel, we have some wonderful panelists who are going to talk about this topic. So I will let Shannon, if you want to introduce yourself first, since you're first on the screen.
Sure. Hey everyone, and happy Friday. We made it. I'm I'm Shannon, and I am one of the co-founders of OpenedEyes and the director of programming. I love doing the content development for OpenedEyes and anything related to programming. Love everything that OpenedEyes does, just our inclusivity, the education, and our connection with the community and with you all. Definitely looking forward to today's conversation. And I'm gonna pass it over to Jess so you can meet the rest of our panel.
Hi, I'm Jess Hubert. I am currently working as the OpenedEyes webinar coordinator, and I am also serving as the assistant director for leadership and belonging over at Mercyhurst University. So a lot of what I do in my full-time job, I kind of translate over to OpenedEyes with inclusivity, belonging, leadership skills, that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to continue working with OpenedEyes in the future. And then I'll pass it over to Angelica.
Hi, everyone. I'm on the same plane you are right now, Shannon. It's happy Friday for me. Yes. My name's Angelica Spraggins. I am an LPC and CRC. I'm also co-owner of a mental health practice that focuses on trauma, BIPOC communities, and queer communities. I think that's it. Right? Yeah. I am very excited to be here and have this conversation about how we're going to manage our own emotions, our thoughts, our feelings when we're dealing with conflict, because I think the world we live in, conflict is a daily thing. So I'm excited to be here.
Exactly. And that is a great segue into kind of our next topic that Shannon's going to talk about.
Yes, we're going to talk about stress because I have a love-hate relationship with stress, but as a licensed mental health professional, we have to talk about it. I just feel like it is so deeply rooted in our mental health. And I think it's something that we can all connect on. So let's open up some group discussion, whether that's the panelists or our beautiful participants. We'd love to hear from you too. What are some stressors in your profession? I know they all exist, and I think they could vary because everybody on the call is in different career fields. So I would love to hear, what stresses you out at in your profession, and how do you handle it? Or maybe you recognize, stress is something I could handle a little bit better. It could really go a little bit either way. And the other thing I meant to add, oh, Angelica, I see you're about to speak up. I just wanted to let them know about the different types of stress we're talking about here. There can be stress at your profession. Of course, there can be some in your personal life as well. But what we're talking about is that organizational stress, which is due to the circumstance of the work that you do, whether that is the workload, your deadlines that you have to meet, the supervisors who are leading you, that could impact that organizational stress. And then there's the operational stress, which is more due to job situations. So let's open it up. What you guys got? What's stressing you out at present or just in general in your profession? And how do you handle it?
I can start off a little bit.
Yeah.
So I can definitely talk about having both organizational and operational stress. Um, it's a little different for me because I am arguably at the top of the food chain at my job.
Okay.
And so the stress that I'm experiencing is actually not having necessarily anyone direct what I need to do. And so
Mm,
um, it's almost that I always equate it to the idea of having freedom and not being necessarily taught what to do with freedom. And
Hmm.
so there's a certain amount of stress that comes with wanting to make the right decisions, not even having experienced what that might look like. And so the way that I try to manage it is I consult colleagues a lot. So, like, I consult my co owner a lot. He's been in the field for 25 years. Friends who are also in the field that are doing something similar. Um, because I like to get feedback, even though I can't necessarily get direction right now. And I will also say, operational stress, just in general. Um, we work with very vulnerable populations. And so the amount of trauma that we hear on a daily basis, right? So the just amount of stress that we hear from our clients in and of itself is very taxing outside of the regular realm of
Yeah.
just giving therapy. So learning how to take those things in, but maybe not carry them home. I'm very mindful of trying to break up the time period between work and home. So, like, I'll leave work and maybe I'll go hit some golf balls, or maybe I'll go hang
Yeah.
out with friends. Then I'll go home because now I've decompressed and I've had an outlet for all of that stress I've experienced. So that's how I'm dealing with those two forms right now. So,
Right. No, I love how you're managing that. And I can relate to having that transition moment. That's what I call it. I'm like, every day, every single day, I need a transition moment before I go into my next like big task, and it really helps. I used to just kind of go back to back to back to back. Then I'm like, why do I feel so overwhelmed, or why is my mind racing at the end of the night? But I recognize that when I am able to have like a pause before I do a big activity, like before doing this, I was doing some cleaning, just to listen to some music, just to get my mind right, And then it's like, all right, let's get into this webinar. So I love that idea of just having a moment to transition. It's like an additional lunch break that you're
yes.
giving yourself.
Yes.
You know, what else we got? What other stressors are going on out there? Or is it just me and Angelica, the only one stressed out at work? Oh my goodness. Oh, I see some things in the chat. That might be some stressors. Yeah, employee relations, completing projects, all of that just stresses you out, and that's just the tasks at work. Then you got to manage, you might have to manage a household or just your life outside of there. And sometimes it can feel like the stress isn't going to stop, or the need for you to be needed is is not going to stop. So can definitely relate. And yeah, Kathleen, that decompression hour, get it in, even if it's 20 minutes, 10 minutes, something that just gives your mind a break that says, okay, we're transitioning to that next activity. What else we got? Yeah. As a student, older students, it's stressful trying to deal with modern technology. That is so true, especially when there's like, at least I feel there's a generation that is really comfortable with technology. Then there's the ones who are still learning, and then there's ones who are like, I don't even know what's going on. So that can be stressful, especially as our world is continuously progressing towards this technological space. And it just doesn't seem like it's stopping. So there's a gap there, a need to get everybody up to speed for sure. Well, this is good. Keep the comments going, and we'll keep the conversation going as well. Because stress impacts each and every one of us, but we each have like a different way of managing it. But the one commonality that human beings possess for the most part is the ability to manage stress. We all have a window of tolerance, which is basically your threshold to handle those day-to-day life experiences, observations, stressors. So we all have this capacity to do that. Now that could vary depending on what's going on at any moment, but just in general, there is this window of tolerance that you have. You might be more calm or grounded and just have that capacity to deal with life demands. I'm going to work tomorrow. I have to do 5 tasks and I'm going to manage that pretty well, you know? So that's what we mean when we talk about your window of tolerance. And then you kind of know when you're out of that window of tolerance, when you start feeling things like anxiety or you're really feeling that stress, your heart's racing, can't focus, etc. That's how you know you're probably getting out of that window of tolerance, and you might need some coping skills to manage those. You might need that, decompression hour, transition minute, like we had mentioned before. Or you might just need to use some mindfulness-based techniques. And our pal Jess is going to talk about that.
Yes. So we actually were talking a little bit about some of those mindfulness techniques already, like the transition hour, which I'm definitely going to steal. Um, but so what is mindfulness? It's really just being conscious and aware of something. So whatever is going on in your life, being aware of that situation instead of just kind of moving through I think a lot of times we like to talk about it in open eyes, like you're on autopilot. Like if you're in a car and you are like sometimes if we're on a highway and we're like on autopilot and we just drove 15 miles and we're like, wait, how did I get here? So being mindful of what you're doing, being connected to your observations, your thoughts, and your biases and behaviors. Um, it's kind of like a sort of type of meditation where you're focusing on being aware of your senses, your feelings without judgment. I think that's a really important piece is we're not judging how we're feeling in this moment. We're not judging that we're stressed out over this situation. It's just how we're feeling in that moment. So being mindful of maybe where that stress came from or how you can maybe move through that stress instead of just continuing on autopilot, being stressed out from work to home or from home to work or etc. Um, Anything else to add, Shannon or Angel?
Well, I was just thinking about, with the mindfulness piece, just being aware of what your stress triggers even are. Because, for example, you could go to work and just say, I'm going to be stressed out because I'm at work. But it's really breaking it down like, what about this is stressing me out? Is it the deadline? Is it the leadership style? Is it my coworkers? You know what I mean? Is it my personal life that I'm bringing into the professional and I got to figure out a boundary there? That is also part of mindfulness is recognizing what is even upsetting me, what is stressing me out, or is stress just like my general disposition, you know?
Absolutely. I wanted to just add there, one of the things I like to do with my clients is I actually use a standard of, I use a SUD score chart because for some people, when you're like, do you have anxiety? That might be their chronic state. So they're not aware, right? But it's like, can you
Exactly.
gauge, are you at a one, at a two, at a three, at a four level of distress? And at a four, you might need breathing, right? But at a
Yeah.
seven or an eight, you might need a more intense coping mechanism. So one of the things I talk about with mindfulness specifically is learning, like being present with yourself, like you just said, Jess and Shannon, but also if you struggle with identifying your emotions, learning to use that numeric kind of chart, and then it just lets you know what coping skill do I need to jump into that might be supportive for me.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I
love
think
that.
sometimes when people say that they meditate or they want to try meditation, and they try it and they're like, well, I'm just sitting here doing nothing. This is not
Hmm.
doing anything for me. Um, that is getting close to like you're at least trying it out, but mindfulness itself is actually very active. Like you actively have to think about some of the things that you may never have thought about because you just let it happen. You just are anxious or you just are stressed, and you really have to think about why, like, why am I stressed and kind of dissect some of those feelings. And that can be really hard, especially if you don't have language for some of those feelings. Like, I know, hopefully, or when I was in therapy and I really was learning my emotions, my therapist would have an emotion chart, and I would pick out what exactly I was feeling. Because a lot of times I'd just say I'm
Hmm.
anxious, and she would help me break down what actually am I frustrated about something that's making me anxious? Am I embarrassed about it? So it was really helpful to really name some of those emotions.
Yes, I love that.
So what are some of the techniques? What does mindfulness actually look like? And I know we mentioned some of these already. So breathing, again, some folks who've never done this before are like, I'm breathing all the time. But there are methods and techniques of how you can mindfully breathe. So inhaling silently, counting to four, holding your breath, then exhaling slowly. That will allow your mind to slow down and not be racing the entire time. You're mindfully breathing. And then there's also guided imagery. This one is particularly one of my favorites that I use all the time. I like this example. I really use this one actually. Seeing the waves. I love water. Angel and I were just talking about the healing properties of water and the environment. So seeing the waves gently lapping, like if you close your eyes and you can picture I picture different beaches. Sometimes I picture Presque Isle, I picture the ocean, and it helps you be in a kind of a peaceful state. I've also listened to like YouTube channels that, if someone's actually telling you an image to like picture, so you don't have to come up with it yourself. But those are really great ways to kind of slow your mind down. But what are some of the other practices that you guys have maybe done to help kind of reduce your stress? Or Angel, what do you use in your with your clients of kind of how to help their mind stop racing?
Yeah. So I like to, the main thing is BLS, bilateral stimulation. So it is an aspect of EMDR, but one of them is just like the butterfly hug, right? And so I don't, you probably are familiar with it, but it's that idea of actually calming the nervous system. So it's just simple tap back and forth like this and deep breathing. I really love that for clients because it's simple, it's easy to remember, and most of us naturally like tap in some way. It might be our foot, it might be on our legs. So that is the main thing that I like to use. I also have a series of books by a Buddhist monk. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he wrote these tiny little series of books of how to be mindful doing different things. So how to like mindfully eat. That's one of the things that I give to my clients, which is just taste the food, right? Like take smaller bites, like take a breath between chewing. And those things naturally kind of slow our nervous system down because we're not rushing through it. So those are two of the main things I give clients, along with deep breathing. Um, and I think the most important thing that I really do tell my clients is, where are you finding your joy from? Because normally when we're doing something we love, we are being mindful while we're doing it because we're experiencing it. So those are just a few of the things. Yeah.
I love that. I love the positive aspect that brings to it, asking them about the joy, because I feel like people don't focus on the joy enough. Especially in therapy, you're thinking, oh, I'm here to talk about my negative experiences and feelings, and the therapist is going to help me work through those. But there's positive experiences too as human beings. So I really like that. The other thing I like to do, at least that I've used with clients, especially younger ones, some of the kids, I started using a metaphorical thermometer for them to gauge where their feelings at. So I might say, where are you on the thermometer right now? If 10 is like I'm about to freak out, and one is I'm chilling. So they'll say where they are on that scale. Then we talk about, okay, so what does it take for you to go to the freak out mode, and what does it take for you to kind of just chill out? And that's where we can start talking about some coping skills, some mindfulness based techniques that they can use. And what's nice about mindfulness techniques is they're always with you. Once you learn them, they're always with you. The breathing techniques, the tapping, things like that. It's like you have this toolbox that you get to carry around with you. So that's what's beneficial about learning some of these techniques.
Yeah, I really do have not a toolbox, but I do have like a sheet of paper that has a list of all of these like coping mechanisms and all of this I really did in therapy. This is not just like I do this in my free time. Um, but it's like, okay, I feel stressed out at this particular moment. This is the coping skill that I'm going to use to kind of get back. So I don't use the same one all the time. Like guided imagery, I really use if I'm really stressed out. Otherwise, I'll just take a walk or listen to my favorite song, take a shower. Um, Angel and Shannon, we were talking about how I feel like a plant. Like I will just be outside in the
Yes.
sun because it helps me feel better. It brings me back to that happy place. Um, So some of the other ways that you can kind of practice mindfulness is being self-aware. Like I said before, this is an active practice. You really need to be self-aware. Saying positive affirmations or doing positive things, holding the door open for someone, giving a little boost of serotonin for them and also for you, checking in with a coworker who maybe has been acting differently, deep breathing exercises, like I had mentioned earlier, listening to music, or a good podcast or something that'll hype you up on the way to work, and also challenging and changing some of your biases if they don't serve you or others. So this is something that we talk about in other sessions for Opened Eyes, but this absolutely goes with this topic of mindfulness and making sure that you understand why you're thinking some of these things or why you're stressed out or anxious about a situation. Maybe you've had a previous bias towards it that you maybe need to like re-examine. Um, Anything else you would add to this slide?
I think it's a good list. The other thing I was going to add as an option, this is something you'd have to buy though, but I've been using coloring books. Okay, they make them for adults, but you can use, the Disney Princess one too, if that's what you're into. They're out there, they exist, and they are so calming. And if you think back to your childhood, you might have colored, and that was like a calming experience then. And so what happens is we grow up and we forget all those things that we did as a kid. We get away from those things, but sometimes it's beneficial to go back and say, oh, that used to calm me down then. Maybe I'll try it out now. And maybe it'll work. So adult coloring books, they're hilarious. Some of them are hilarious or just like really cool designs. So that's another one I would recommend. It's just really calming.
Yeah, I was actually just listening to a podcast that was talking about how as adults we forget how to play, which I,
Yes.
I really resonated with.
Hmm.
And it has something to do with us being told that we need to like sit still or we need to stop playing as a kid. So we need to kind of get back to that like movement and playing aspect and coloring. And I've been making
Yeah.
friendship bracelets again, like
Yes, so fun. I
just
did that with
that kind of
kids.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
can
playing
really
video
help.
games. Even though video
Hmm.
games get a bad rep, but with moderation, it is a moment. It's a mindful moment. Gives your mind a break. Your mind doesn't always have to be thinking and absorbing information. It needs to rest too. It needs to chill. So if
Hmm.
that chilling comes from playing a video game, then so be it. So it's just kind of being creative with what works for you because mindfulness isn't a one size fits all, except for breathing, but that's just my personal opinion. But it is about finding what works for you.
Okay, I'll quickly go over some of these because we kind of talked about it at length. But some of the advantages of being mindful is that you're more present, you're less distracted, you're kind of more aware of when you are reacting to things. It'll improve your stress management, and when you are actively listening or mindfully listening to somebody else, the speaker and the listener both feel heard and understood instead of listening to react, you're listening to actually listen and understand. Um, Mindful listening can help you retain information better. You can pay attention longer and it boosts your self esteem. And then some of the disadvantages if you're kind of not practicing these things is that you aren't as present with people. You aren't as present with your coworkers or your supervisor or your employees. You can be easily distracted by thoughts and worries. You are then unaware of your reactions and what you say to others. So, this front of mind thinking is you only focus on what you need and your thoughts, instead of focusing on this backup mind where you are also thinking about, okay, what is this person speaking to me? I have my own needs, but they also have their own needs. And if you are mindful, you can kind of slow down and also think about your needs, but also what do they need when they're speaking to you. Um, and then if you aren't practicing mindfulness, you don't feel heard as well as other people don't feel heard. And then you can definitely have some miscommunication errors as well. Okay, trying to move to the next slide. I'm not sure if you guys can hear my clicking. There we go.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
So the reason why we teach about all of this mindfulness stuff is one, we've seen it work, but also there's some research that basically shows that the more you're able to develop those mindfulness based skills, the more in tune you are with yourselves, the more potential to have better interactions with other people. You'll have coping skills that actually work and you find a benefit from. And you can also teach those same skills that we learn, let's say as adults, we can teach them to the younger generation as well, so that they're equipped at a young age to start practicing deep breathing, for example, so that as they grow into adulthood, it's just like a natural habit. And as far as in a school setting or really in other settings too, um, the mindfulness based practices have an influence on your emotional regulation, your ability to work through difficult situations and be resilient. It impacts your optimism, that outlook on life, that ability to think positively, and it can impact your social interactions as well and help your communication with others. Just because the more mindful you are of how you're presenting yourself, your tone of voice, your body language, the more apt you are to, speak clearly and also to listen clearly because you're present in that moment, not only to have yourself feel heard, but you're also like in a space of being able to receive information as well. So that's why these skills are so important and so useful.
May I add something in,
Yeah.
Shannon?
Yep. Yep.
Um, as I was reading through this, the part that is self-awareness, I
Yes.
absolutely align with that. And I think when we talk about mindfulness, people assume that that means calm, right? Like you're
Yes.
always calm.
Mm-hmm.
And an important part of mindfulness is knowing when you have reached your limit, knowing when being aware of, okay, I need a break or I need a moment. And I think that those things are very important as well when we're talking about mindfulness, because the goal is to understand ourselves better so that we can show up as our best versions of ourselves in the world around us. But sometimes
Mm-hmm.
humans are pushed to our limit. But if we can
Mm-hmm.
recognize it, we can maybe keep from spewing that on other people, and we can really refocus and figure out what we need for ourselves.
Yes. That is so true. I feel like what you're talking about too is emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And the more of that you can have, the better. I promise you all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It just improves, I feel, your understanding of yourself, but also how understanding of how you respond to others
Mm-hmm.
and how they respond to you and how you receive that. It is
Mm-hmm.
such an important skill to have, is not only being mindful and self-aware, but being having some emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely helpful. And as we're talking about mindfulness and just being equipped with the things that you need to navigate the world in different spaces, we have to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, he came up with this theory that said there are things that human beings need to eventually be their best selves. He broke it down into this triangle, and the foundation of those needs is having some physiological safety, that food, clothing, shelter, those basic needs met. Once those are there, then you can move on to those other steps. So, one example I use is I have worked with people who have been homeless. And if I came into therapy trying to just give them, let's work on anxiety and let's work on all these things, they'd be like, ma'am, I'm not even there yet. Okay. I don't even have a house. So that's where we started. I would start with that need. We have to figure out how you can have some safety and have some shelter. And those are those two bottom portions of the triangle, having some of that foundation. And then once those are there, then you can start getting into, for example, the group therapy and connecting with other people, being a little more social. And then from that connection and that fellowship, maybe you're feeling a little more confident, feeling better about yourself, and then you have better self-esteem. As you're moving up there, you're getting more confident with yourself, then you can reach that last portion at the top, which is self actualization. And that is how he describes as like your true self, your best self. You feel accomplished, you feel like you have grown, and you're just proud of yourself and where you're at. So that is what is talked about as far as the hierarchy of needs goes. But the biggest thing is getting that foundation there. And this translates into the work setting as well. Having a positive work environment. You have the right tools to do the job. Because it can be frustrating if you don't. You're thrown into a role and it's like, good luck. Like, that's not a good feeling. You want to feel like you have the tools to get the job done. So then you can move on and start opening up to coworkers, connecting with other people, attending events outside of work, and then maybe your work will shine. You're getting recognized for it. You feel valued. You feel comfortable and safe enough to bring new ideas to your supervisor or your coworkers. And then you reach the top. Your big vision, your self-actualization. But again, I will remind you, you have to have those foundational pieces of like safety and security and just feeling like you're equipped to do the work that has been placed in your lap. So, does anybody have questions on that? Comments? How does that resonate with you? If you don't have none, I support that too. As long as you're taking in this information, that's what we like. Because this is a perfect time for us to transition into our big discussion. I'd love to hear from our participants as well as our wonderful panelists as well. Jess, you want to get us popping?
Yeah. Um, I can't remember if I said at the beginning, if some of this stuff is like, I feel like there's a lot of thoughts going in all of our heads as this is going.
Hmm.
And if typing is too slow, feel free to unmute and
Yeah.
we want this to be kind of a discussion. So if you're typing something out and you're like, this is taking forever, just unmute and you can ask your question or a comment. Um, but our first question is, what mindfulness practices do you most recommend to clients? This is obviously geared to Angel. What mindfulness practices do you most recommend to clients who are struggling with issues outside of their control?
Yeah. So I do some work with IFS, which is the internal family system. And there is a book called No Bad Parts. And so they have individual meditations that you can kind of do to connect with the different parts of yourself. And a lot of my clients will tell me meditation is very difficult, but you'd be amazed at how easy it is to close your eyes and then just talk to yourself or have a conversation with yourself. So one of the meditations is like, what's an emotion that you're feeling? Well, let's have a conversation with that emotion. Why are you feeling that way? What do you need from me? What does this emotion need from me? And so I really love that practice because it really gets my clients into that meditation realm where they're sitting with themselves and they're actually asking the pieces of themselves what they need. And a lot of the times we don't take that time in life. Most people don't stop in the middle of the day and say, well, what do I need right now? But if we can get that practice on a daily basis when we're chilling at home, they tend to be able to connect to that externally and they start asking themselves that question, not just the emotion. What do I need for myself right now? Um, and again, I think it's different than, well, just sit there and let your thoughts run because some people are very scared of their thoughts. Some people don't want to sit with those thoughts. And so it's a safe way to have a conversation with yourself and practice mindfulness at the same time.
I like that. Especially not having your mind wander, because I do think that, I mean, we're doing that in general, but at nighttime, the thoughts, at least I've found in my therapy sessions that, the clients will say, like, my thoughts are always racing at night. It's not like there's just one thought. And so being able to categorize that, I think, is really helpful. And it seems like it's more manageable as opposed to just like, my thoughts are running all around the place. It's like, okay, let me focus on this one and identify what the feeling is connected to that. Love that.
Mhm.
It just would, I feel like that would cause somebody to feel like they can manage that emotion a little bit more and go to sleep.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
And bringing that back to like the conflict resolution piece, I know that there's plenty of things that I want to say to somebody that
Hmm.
I am in an argument with, or we're not seeing eye to eye. There's plenty of things that I want to say, but I shouldn't say those things. So being well, first of all, being mindful and aware that I shouldn't say those things is a
Yeah.
good practice. But I also journal a lot with those. So they're never going to see that as long as I, keep track of my journal. Um,
Hmm.
but I'll write down everything that I want to say just so it's out of my head. It's out of my immediate thoughts. And usually those thoughts will then disappear unless I go back and read it, which I tend to not do that.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a way if you are struggling with wanting to kind of get your frustrations out, but you don't want to vent to somebody else, but you do need to get it out, you can either talk to yourself, or you write it down. Or I know some people would like do voice notes. Like just getting it out is really helpful. And that's definitely a mindfulness practice to where you are being self-aware that you are frustrated and you are probably rightfully frustrated, but you don't want to also get into a situation that you can't get out of by saying those frustrations out loud to the other person.
For sure. I think we talked about something like that at the last webinar too, but I had mentioned texting yourself,
Hmm.
similar to how you're journaling, but most people have their phones on them, and so you could text yourself whatever those thoughts are, just to clear that space out for more information to come in, or just for some more peace to come in as well. That's a great technique.
Hmm. So the next question is, how can you incorporate mindfulness practices in the workplace?
Well, I can speak to what we are trying to do at Journey, which is a process. So, one of the things that we've tried to implement is like a separate, like lounging space for the clinicians outside of their office where they can kind of go and they can kind of sit with each other and they can bounce ideas off or they can just eat snacks, whatever that is. And I think that that is important to take that pause because sometimes when you're in that office, the only thing you're focusing on is resolving or working through concerns that clients have or finishing paperwork. And so, again, going back to that joy being a part of mindfulness, um, I try to implement, like, I remember I told one clinician, they were like, "Oh, I'm not taking a vacation. I have all this PTO." I was like, "Oh, no, we don't do that at Journey. You need to take your PTO. You need to focus on your needs because we do such a great job of focusing on our clients' needs." So, again, implementing that joy for mindfulness is something I really try to implement at Journey.
I like that. Having like a lounge, something, just some type of break, something to look forward to that is just like a minute away,
Mhm.
can really help you get through the workday and use your PTO. You earned
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Leave work, okay? I've
Yeah.
seen memes and things say PTO means pay the others, which is a little funny, but it's like truly other people are still getting paid to do this work. You can take a break. You will be
Mhm.
okay. And honestly, you'll be better for it. Yes, the emails and things are going to be there, but it'll be fine. You need a break to even be
Mhm.
able to read through all that stuff. So take the
Mhm.
time. And there was a question to the audience, so would love to hear from you all. What are you going through? What mindfulness practices are you using during the workday? How do you feel after? What's that like? Hmm.
Yeah, so this is Shannon. For me,
Okay.
I really do like to remove myself completely from the environment that is stressing.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have to get up and take a walk or and again, just getting up out of my seat and stretching helps me to refocus on the things that I have to do. It may take 5 minutes, it may take an hour. But
Right.
the reality of it is separating myself from what is giving me anxiety or stress is key.
Yeah. Leaving the situation and walking away. Love that.
Actually, just to add to that, Shannon, is there was this psychologist, this woman who said that we spend a lot of time in mental health learning how to manage stress. She was like, but the ultimate goal of our mental health should be how to eventually remove ourselves from excessive stress so we're not just living in it. And so
Love
that
that.
having that moment of I need to step away is also, very mindful because I think we try to fight through a lot of things as human beings. Um, and sometimes coping skills are great because there's always some level of distress in life. But if something is excessively distressing, an exit plan is a wonderful way to manage
For sure.
excessive, overwhelming stress that's just unnecessary sometimes.
Hmm. And you almost why I like leaving the room sometimes. Like when it comes to stress, you're physically going through something, you feel something. And sometimes when you're in a room, no matter how big it is, you can feel like it's just enclosing on you. And if I don't get out, I'm gonna get squished. So it's like you have to remove yourself from that space. You could always come back. But sometimes when you try to push through and stay in that moment, then you start seeing some of those behaviors that you might not be proud of, might not feel healthy, might not feel good. So that's another benefit of just leaving the room. It gives you a moment to chill out and then come back to reconnect. We got anything else? Oh, I see some comments in the chat here. We got some deep breathing. Yes, and being mindful of releasing your shoulders. Everybody, lower your shoulders right now. I'm sure they were a little up and you didn't even realize it. I know I was in that space. So relax those shoulders. That is so true. Looks like there's a quiet room at one place. I used to work at a place that had a quiet room, which was really, really nice and just relaxing. Gives you a reason to get out of your office, but you didn't necessarily have to talk to anybody. Love that. Making sure you take a break, go for a walk, read a book, get out of the office, take your break. You don't get a prize for working through the break. Maybe somewhere, but everywhere I've worked, and I've worked for the federal government, corporate spaces, nonprofit, all the things. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese, and even there, you needed a break, okay? Just to refocus, just to take a minute to eat, to sit, to think about anything else besides work, 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 work.
I think we also, like, I'm just thinking, if you want to go outside and you think you're taking a break by doing like a walking meeting because I'm outside, you're still in the work mindset. You're
Yes,
still focusing on work and maybe something that's stressing you out. Yes, you may be moving your body, which is great, but taking an actual mindful break where you're not thinking about work or you're not thinking about what's stressing you out. And that can be hard because our minds wander back to what we're preoccupied with. But as long as you realize that your mind is wandering and like work to come back to that space, then you're practicing mindfulness. Because I do like a good walking meeting, but sometimes I just want to go for a walk and just look at the flowers. Like I said, I'm a
yes.
plant.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, So the last written question that we have, if there's more questions in the chat, feel free to put them in there. But sometimes to best protect our mental health, we have to say no to things. What advice do you have for communicating your boundaries in the workplace, relationships, family, etc.?
Yeah. So for me, I think the first thing I tell clients, I tell friends, I tell family, they call me the boundary queen because I got good boundaries. I'm gonna say no, and I don't care. I'm gonna say no. Is figure out what your boundaries are. Figure out what feels good, what doesn't feel good, so that when you do get to the point, right? Because sometimes we skip to trying to articulate our boundaries and we haven't taken the time to understand what a boundary is. And when I am talking to clients or friends, what I always say is boundaries are not a negative thing, which that's also a common belief. If I'm putting a boundary up, I'm pushing people away. But the second thing is when you're interacting and there are things you don't like in a relationship, consider whether or not that's a boundary that's being crossed and that's something you need to articulate. And then once you figured that out, I'm a firm believer in having the conversation before the incident happens, right? So if I take the time I'm doing the work and I figure out my boundaries, sit down with, if your mom's the one who crosses the boundaries, go to lunch with her one day. Hey, mom, I just want to talk. I'm growing. These are some of my boundaries. This is what they look like. And this is, have that conversation so people understand what it is. And then the very last thing, which is where a lot of people kind of fall short on boundaries, is how you enforce them. A boundary is not a verbal command to somebody else. A boundary is something you're doing to protect yourself. And in order to protect whatever is happening, you have to be willing to follow through on whatever that is that boundary means. If I say, don't scream in my face and curse at me, how am I going to implement that boundary if you do it? And that is normally the hardest part for people because sometimes that means limiting conversations. Sometimes that means that relationship might not be the healthiest. So I think the three steps that I would really say is identify what your boundary is, have those straightforward discussions, and then be willing to follow through on however you had planned to reinforce that boundary.
Another part to be mindful in connection to that, Angel, because everything you said is spot on. I was just thinking is it's like how you enforce that boundary and how you respond when somebody crosses it is just
Mm-hmm.
so important. But I feel like it takes practice to
Mm-hmm.
get, you know what I mean? Like I could set a boundary and
Mm-hmm.
enforce it somewhat, but not
Mm-hmm.
exactly how I would want to, or not 100%. Because I'm like, you
Mm-hmm.
might have some, it's like, how are they going to respond? What are they going to think? Or,
Mm-hmm.
do they think I'm mean now? Something like that. But then it's like, this is how I feel. This is the boundary it's like you have to go back to why am I setting this boundary in the first place? It is for you. But sometimes we get caught up in how are they going to feel about you setting that boundary? But
Yeah.
truly, that boundary is, I feel like what you're saying is like the boundary is for you, it's for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those moments for sure.
Absolutely. Yes.
For sure. Um, so in the comments, we got some over explaining. Yes, that's what sucks about boundaries. You feel like you do have to over explain why you're setting them and why that person should respect them. It's almost like a boundary, a simple boundary example is saying no, right? No is the full sentence. But for some reason, in some situation, it's like a springboard for negotiation, discussion, when it was just no. Like there was a period there that I didn't say, or you don't see. And that's why there's some confusion here. But you do end up being in that space where it's like, oh, now I have to over explain myself. And now I have all these weird feelings when I just wanted to say, I don't like this. And I want you to respect that. But then when you're in those situations where it's like I'm over explaining, think about who you're over explaining to and why that is. Why couldn't they just accept your boundary for what it is and your explanation for what it is? Why are they still pressing you about it? So that's some advice that I would say if you end up in those situations.
I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that over explaining boundaries leads to separation of the attachment. So, like, if I'm sitting there and I'm explaining to you why this boundary is necessary for you and me, it opens up other questions. How do you deal with that?
So is the question, how do you deal with kind of that extended questions that come after you set the boundary?
Yes, this is the back and forth. Like
Yeah.
if I've established the boundary and I've already explained to you why this boundary is necessary for you and me,
Mhm.
then it poses other questions that continues the back and forth. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think whenever you set a boundary, it's twofold, right? Because we don't want to play the game where we're trying to negotiate our boundary with somebody. But on the other side of that, if an individual has not experienced healthy boundaries, or maybe they haven't experienced you expressing boundaries, I think that there could be some space in there for explaining and teaching not only what you need, but also how they can do the same thing. They can set their own boundaries. The one thing though that sometimes we don't talk about with boundaries is healthy boundaries sometimes expose unhealthy relationships. So if I set a boundary with a person who is not a healthy person, like they maybe don't have emotional intelligence, that is when it turns into arguments. And that's sometimes the hardest part about boundaries, which is
Right.
now I'm recognizing that trying to keep myself safe is not a priority for this person. And how do I navigate a relationship if these unhealthy behaviors start to pop up?
Right. Okay.
So I hope that answered a
Yeah,
little
it
bit.
really did. It really did. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I think I'd just like to add on to that. It gets even more difficult when it's family. Um, and I don't have advice for it. Like, I don't have perfect advice for it, but I think a lot of the techniques that we kind of discussed already, like, especially just removing yourself from the situation for a little bit, and like recollecting your thoughts and recollecting. I like to think a lot of also like recollecting my values. So if I have a family member who I'm getting frustrated with and wants me to behave in a certain way, and they're my family, I respect their opinion, obviously, but I'm my own person. So I will end up just leaving that conversation for a little bit and maybe leaving that space if I can for a little bit and remembering, okay, they're my family, I respect them, but this is who I am. This is me. These are my values and I'm not going to stray from them whether or not you want me to. And it's very difficult, especially with family, because some people are okay with being like, well, I'll cut you off, but then others are like, well, it's my family, so I'm not going to do that. So
Hmm.
yeah, very
Yeah,
hard.
it could definitely be hard to enforce those, rules and boundaries with family. They've just known you for so long, and it's like they do see the good in you and the best for you. But when you set that boundary, I feel like family just takes it a little deeper. Like it's a personal attack almost. When it's like,
They really think
no.
they can negotiate with you.
Yes, yes. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, I want to keep you in my life. I just want it to look like this. I want it to feel like this. That's all I'm saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it can be so hard. Like you were saying, it can be so hard to adjust that boundary for family. Like, oh, well, it is my mom or whomever,
Right.
Hmm.
I really like to, whenever I'm setting a boundary, I really like to ask that person, what's a boundary you want to implement? Like, what are
Hmm.
you experiencing in this relationship? So they don't feel like it's like well, she's telling me I can't do this. It's like, no, I want to know what makes you feel safe too. I've done that with my parents.
Hmm.
I have a Southern Black mom who does everything for everybody. And so when I expressed my boundary to her, I looked at her and I'm like, well, what are your boundaries, mom? Like, what do you not like doing? Do you like
Yeah,
coming to clean for 5 hours or do you want to come and relax?
you're
And
right.
so I think she responded better because I was also offering her something and setting my own boundary.
Hmm. I like that. And that's like collaborative, it's like I'm not just saying like you got to change all this or just
Mm-hmm.
me. Like what can we both do here,
Mm-hmm.
to make things go well. We got in the comments reminding myself that consequences already have a negative connotation to it for sure. And it is about redefining that. Even redefining boundary, that can come off negative for whatever for whatever you envision a wall up. But it's really I'm trying to take my walls down. And so that's why I'm setting this boundary. So I think that is such a good point that, that idea of consequence has to be negative, and it really doesn't. If you work out, a consequence of that is you get stronger, for example. That's a good thing. So
Yeah, or
shifting.
you set up this boundary and the consequence is you're no longer stressed at work.
Yeah, look at
That's a
that.
wonderful
Love
consequence.
that one. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, or you like I know we mentioned earlier, if you set my office really tries to follow this boundary. We don't answer anything after 5 p.m.
Hmm.
That way you don't bring work home with you. And I know we talked
Yeah.
about that earlier
Yeah.
in the discussion that that was always a stressor, trying to not bring work home with you. If you set that boundary of like I don't have any notifications for my email on my phone or Teams or anything for that reason. So I just don't see what's going on until I get into the office the next morning. Okay. Well, that was our last like scripted question. But if anybody else has any other questions or comments, feel free to either unmute or put them in the chat while we have our panelists here. Let me get back. So, like I said, this is our last webinar in this Common Ground series. But if you would like to continue working with OpenEyes or you'd like us to do something else with these webinars, this is our contact information. Follow us on all of the things. We post whatever we're doing on all of the things. And if you have some time, give us a review on how we did today. If you want to screenshot this QR code, or I can put the link in the chat, I think, as well. But Kathleen will also be sending out the link in a follow-up email to everybody. But if there's no more discussion, then everybody have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Angel, for our conversation today. I think I've enjoyed it. I love talking about this kind of stuff.
This is a great conversation.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
You too, Dave. Have a good weekend. Hopefully
Yeah,
it's
thanks,
nice
Dave.
out.
Yeah, right.